Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're new here, a special welcome to you. I'm Lindy. I read a lot, and this is a place where I talk about books and sometimes a few other things. So, in my last video, I talked about a stained t-shirt that I tried to save with a purple logwood dye, and the initial results were not successful. I am so happy with how it turned out. Just look at this. I'm really, really happy. What I did was I used elastics to preserve the dark purple, and then I discharged the dye in a citric acid bath, and yeah, I'm so happy that I saved this t-shirt because it's very precious to me. Whew. Now, another non-book related thing that I did in the past few days is I went to a play here in Victoria. It's called From Alaska. The playwright is Sébastien Harrisson, and it was translated to English by Leona Brodie. Harrisson is a Quebecois author. The play is a two-hander. There's an older woman, a retired lesbian librarian, and one night a boy who's in high school breaks into her house, and it's basically conversation between these two. He is afraid of his identity, and he realizes that he's gay. So this is what the two have in common, and I found the play quite powerful and well done. On the other non-book related thing that I did yesterday, I went to a tea festival in downtown Victoria, and there were so many people. I was really surprised at the popularity of this event. It was very crowded. That was why my friend and I only stayed for an hour and a half, but I still had a really good time. I bought some tea. I had actually been looking for some Kimon Chinese black tea, and while I didn't find that, I found some dark pu'er tea from Yunnan that I really liked. In fact, 6 of the vendors there, their specialty was pu'er, so it's kind of interesting just to learn more about that particular type of tea. The opening symposium event was a Japanese tea ceremony, so we watched that. There was a guide who was telling us quietly, explaining what was going on in the tea ceremony. And we were able to ask questions afterwards. So yeah, very interesting. I'm a tea fan, and I guess I'm one of very many here in this city. So on to the books. I'm going to start with a DNF. I did not finish Mood Swings by Frankie Barnet. It's a fat novel. I got 55 pages in, and the reason I'm telling you about it is because what didn't work for me might be exactly what interests you in this. Frankie Barnet is a Canadian author. She lives in Montreal, and I have recently read a collection of her short stories, An Indoor Kind of Girl. I think if this had been a short story, I would have liked it. It's a thought experiment, kind of zany, but for me, the novelty wore off, and I just lost interest. So the thought experiment is that this is set in an alternate but very similar North America, where all of the fauna have died. There's more explanation in here, but that's, basically no more animals, no more insects, no more birds, none of that. And only humans are left, and plants. And so here's one little bit. I want to give you an idea of the style. 5-6 days post-fauna, people began to love plants to strange degrees. They took them on walks and gave them little names. It was necessary to have something to love, and loving just each other was unthinkable. Okay, Leanna thought, I have a couple of ideas here. 2 weeks post-fauna, she snuck inside a Home Depot garden center in the middle of the night and found the sweetest little bonsai tree on one of the shelves. She held it in her arms, ceramic pot and all. The tiny leaves were not fir, but for somebody out there, Leanna imagined, they'd do the job. They'd have to. She went home and posted a picture on her Instagram, #greenfriend, #minime, #fallinlove. 15 minutes later, a deal was struck with a friend of a friend for over $100. Thus it began, the hustle. It's amusing, but like I said, it was like it wore thin for me at this kind of mood that I'm in, so I'm not going to finish it, but perhaps it is perfect for you. I got the same kind of feeling when I gave up on another book some months ago, On Earth as It Is on Television. It's a book by Emily Jane. And while at first I was really enjoying it, I found it delightful, whimsical, but 50 pages or so in, I felt like, that's enough. With mood swings, I thought maybe I'll just read the ending. So I went to read the last chapter, and I didn't even feel like finishing that chapter to get to the end to see what would happen. So that's a good indication that it's just not for me at this time. And now on to the books that I did finish, starting with a reread, Held by Anne Michaels. Now, I did have a copy of this in print, but my friend Lynn, who I went to the tea festival with yesterday, was interested in reading it, so I passed it on to her. So I'll just put a little picture here. I don't know why I don't do that more often, because it's easier than trying to hold up a book while I talk. It's like there's this booktube protocol or something that you hold up a book and talk about it. I guess that's good if you're not editing and adding in the cover of a book. So, Anne Michaels. She is a Canadian author of novels and poetry. She has had a lot of critical acclaim, has won awards, dozens actually of international awards, and Held is currently on the Booker shortlist. I first listened to this in audio in December last year and loved it. I think I loved it even more reading the print edition. She is going to be at the Vancouver Writers' Festival later this month. I'm looking forward to hearing her. The very first book that I read by Anne Michaels was the novel Fugitive Pieces. And there's a passage in Held that really brings Fugitive Pieces to mind, because she says she liked books that seemed to begin again at the middle, the way life so often did, the way a day or an evening or a conversation or a song or a long, worthwhile idea so often did, the way love so often did. If you've read Fugitive Pieces, you know that the book seems to start over again in the middle. So, Held. What's this one about? It covers more than a century. There's a section from 1908 and another section that's in 2025, and it's mostly different characters from one family, but also their friends and kind of extended family, and we see people from infancy, and then, then in their later years. It's quite kaleidoscopic that way, and the narrative is not always in time sequence, but these scenes are always interconnected in some way. They're stories about war and peace and love, life, death, the big topics. Photography comes up a few times. Here's a passage I like. If you hold open the shutter long enough, everything moving disappears, or leaves only a trace, a clouding of the air, a thickening of the light, the breath of absence. She thought several things then. One could make a long exposure, say 30 years of married life, or family life in a kitchen, infants growing to adults, and all that the photographic plate would show was an empty room. But it would not be empty. Instead, it would be full of life, invisible and real. If you're the kind of reader who is looking for language and use of language in the fiction that you pick up, this one is pure delight. And I also reread this hybrid book of poetry and art by Anne Michaels and Bernice Eisenstein called Correspondences. So it's a accordion book. So it's done beautifully. With on one side this long poem that is actually an elegy for Anne Michaels' father, Isaiah Michaels. He had dementia towards the end of his life. And on the other side, it's a series of portraits and biographies of people who influenced or were important to her father. So they're poets, writers, intellectuals, political activists, musicians, Holocaust survivors. Many of these people are Jewish, not all of them. And so the two sides are kind of in correspondence with each other, and this is a book definitely to read and reread. We actually own a copy. I'm showing you a library copy. We do own a copy, but it's out on loan to a friend right now. And speaking of accordion books, I made a book like that, a little small accordion book that I will maybe include at the very end of this video at the outro, so you can watch for that. Next up is another long narrative poem. This is called You're Gonna Love This, and it's by Dina del Bucchia, who's a Canadian poet who lives in Vancouver. Her work is always very funny. So this is a big contrast with Anne Michaels, who tends to be much more serious in her writing. But that doesn't mean that Del Bucchia doesn't cover serious topics, because she does. She talks about caring for a spouse who has a long-term disability, and caring for herself as well, and balancing all that out. TV culture as a ubiquitous presence in our lives is there throughout the book. And because I'm not much of a TV watcher, a lot of references were lost on me, especially more current references, as I stopped watching TV in the early 90s. Still, I got a lot out of this. You don't need to know these shows, but probably you would get more layers of meanings if you did. Here's an example. I got behind on my taxes for years, but somehow managed to find time to watch 8 seasons of a show I don't remember. For years, whenever I tried to take out a T4, I felt as if I'd fallen off a piece of 80s schoolyard play equipment into a pit of pebbles. My shame is a weed that blooms constantly, and the only way to slow it down is to download an entire season of a show full of irresponsible characters. Multiple shows. Every show. I need to see people misbehaving. I cannot watch responsible adults right now. I need to feel seen. And later, wow, I'm depressed. I can admit it. I've never been to therapy and only saw 2.5 seasons of The Sopranos. Yes, I do know who Dr. Melfi is. No, I don't know how to take care of myself. When you live with someone with depression, you don't want to be rude, take away their identity by having the same issue. I told myself this over and over. Pull the twee cathead sheets up high and hide instead. We can't both be patients. One of us has to be the Fraser Crane. Except we live in a 1-bedroom apartment with no view and no dog, and we aren't pompous enough to think we deserve to help ourselves. One has to be of use, just has to be. Sometimes I think I'm too weak to have a full-on breakdown. But of course, that's not how it works. You're gonna love this. Next up is a picture book by 3 Indigenous creators. It's Be a Good Ancestor by Leona Prince and Gabrielle Prince, who are both Dakelh from the central interior of British Columbia. And the art is by Carla Joseph, who is Cree and also from British Columbia. I heard about this on the newly released 3rd edition of From Sea to Sea to Sea Indigenous picture books. I will include a link down below because if you are looking for Indigenous Canadian picture books, there are 3 editions now and many excellent examples of picture books, recommended examples, and these are all books that are in print. Be a Good Ancestor is written in rhyme with a repeating format. I'll show you some of the pages. Be a good ancestor with water. Raindrops become puddles, puddles become streams, streams become rivers, rivers become life. And you can see Joseph's art style. She uses lots of colors. It's kind of a naive style, lots of swirling movement. Be a good ancestor with living things that swim. Eggs become elevens, elevens become fry, fry become sockeyes, sockeyes become nourishment. And how's that for vocabulary? I can't think of any other kid's book that has the word aleven in it. As you can see in the image, this is the very early stage of a fish, right after it hatches, and for a short period of time it's still got the egg yolk attached. And one last page. Be a good ancestor with yourself. Children become adults, adults become leaders, leaders become elders, elders become ancestors. See the ancestors up there in the northern lights. And another picture book. It's Skating Wild on an Inland Sea. And the authors are Jean Pendziwol and Todd Stewart. Both of them have won awards for their picture books in the past. And this one won the Elizabeth Mrazek Cleaver Award. It was just announced in April this year. And it is also up for 2 other awards. I'm going to link the Canadian Children's Book Centre awards down below, because this is another place to discover great Canadian books on shortlists, awards shortlists. I grew up on the shores of a very small lake that only occasionally would freeze solid without having snow on it, so we could go out skating wild. And this book captures that absolute magic of being out there on the ice, hearing the wild sounds. It's like a song of the ice. Beautiful. And next up is a children's audiobook. This is the only non-Canadian book I've got on my video today. It's Impossible Creatures by Katherine Rundell, who is a British author and academic. I also loved her book Rooftops, which I highly recommend. Impossible Creatures is fantastic. It's a portal fantasy. In the print edition, there are a whole bunch of illustrations of these mythological creatures that are part of the novel. The illustrations are by the Croatian artist Tomislav Tomic. I'll pop some of them in here. The audiobook is read by Samuel West, and it's not only an adventure story, but the message of caring for the earth, caring for each other is just delivered so beautifully. There are children who are able to be brave, take action, do what's right, and definitely a feel-good story that is not just for kids. I recommend it for all ages. When I was looking up more information about Katherine Rundell, I learned that she grew up in Zimbabwe and Belgium. And this is what she says. She likes to begin each day with a cartwheel because reading is almost exactly the same as cartwheeling. It turns the world upside down and leaves you breathless. I'm so excited that she is going to be at the Vancouver Writers Fest later this month, and I'm going to hear her there. Next up, another audiobook. This one is an adult novel, In Winter, I Get Up at Night, by Jane Urquhart. The audio is read by Christine Horne. Jane Urquhart is one of those authors that might not be well known outside of Canada, but she has published 8 novels, several books of poetry, although it's been a while. It's been about 10 years since her last novel. She tends to write about women who are aloof and self-protective, and that's exactly what the main character is like in this book. Her name is Emer McConnell. She's a substitute music teacher working in rural Saskatchewan in the 1950s, and some of the action goes back to her childhood, growing up on a prairie farm where she has a really bad accident when she's 11 years old, and after that spends at least a year in a children's hospital or children's ward of a hospital. Part of this novel is getting to know those other children, and Urquhart uses them very well to portray the non-British members of Canadian society. One of them is Jewish, one of them is a Doukhobor child, there's a black child. Colonial hypocrisy is made clear in this novel. So Emer's family is Irish, and this is in her voice. One tribe forced out of its homeland by imperial dominance, war, and scarcity migrates across the sea and forces another tribe out of its homeland. The tragedy of this. So there's an element that didn't work for me in this book, and that is the romance that Emer has with a man who's a famous scientist. However, the references in this book to larger and darker events in Canadian history and the sexism and racism in Canadian society really did work for me. And I also like the way that various strands of the narrative come together by the end. It is a quiet book, so it's for people who have patience for this kind of story. One of the things mentioned in here is about how one of the other kids in the hospital room said that he used to win all the red ribbons at his school's field day. And this is a question that I've had for a long time. Why the first place for Canadians has been red ribbons, whereas in the US it was blue, it still is blue ribbons. If you know more information about this, red ribbons versus blue ribbons, please leave me a comment down below. The title, by the way, if you don't recognize it, comes from a Robert Louis Stevenson poem. The collection, A Child's Garden of Verses, also comes up in the novel. It's from the poem Bed in Summer. In winter I get up at night and dress by yellow candlelight. Skating wild on an inland sea meshes so well with those lines. Just how dark it is when the children are getting up to go skating in the morning. And one more book to tell you about, a collection of short stories, Peacocks of Instagram. It's by Deepa Rajagopalan. I actually picked this up at Monroe's Books when my friend Marilyn Maya Mendoza was here visiting. She has a booktube channel. If you're not familiar with her, I will leave a link down below. We had gone to Beacon Hill Park and there were peacocks there, and then the title and just the cover of this book really grabbed my interest. So I picked this up in May, finally got around to reading it, and I loved it. Every story is strong in this book. So they're all about South Asian protagonists that have these serious setbacks. Either they're dealing with grievous bodily injury or serious illness or betrayals or unhappy marriages or just outdated attitudes, and yet they find a way to move forward. So it's very uplifting to read these stories. I liked her writing so much. This passage that I flagged is a Tim Hortons reference, which I collect on my book blog that I don't use for very much else these days, but I will include a link in case you're interested. And also, I wanted to mention the format. It's another one of those short, fat books. I talked about Jen Curran's Disembark recently, which is by the same publisher, House of Anansi. And yeah, I guess it's their thing. It's working for me because I've liked both collections a lot, and I think you will too. So that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Stick around if you want to see the accordion book that I made with little samples of dye experiments from a bouquet that I took apart. I always love hearing from you, so please do say hello in the comments down below. Tell me what you're reading. Have you read any of these? Are you a tea fan? Just put in a little teacup emoji if you don't know what else to say. I'll see you all soon. Thanks again. Bye for now. So a friend gave me this bouquet of flowers in 2020. And I decided to see what kind of colors of dye I could get out of it. So this is the project. were pine needles, liatris flowers, hypericum berries. I have 4 different panels here because I used 4 different textile treatments. All of the fabric was wool and silk except the centerpiece, which was only wool. And so it's always in the same order, which one had mordant and what kind of mordant I used. There's a large pine cone. I had notes about how long I simmered, how long I steeped. There's a small pine cone. So that was my little book. I also had fun figuring out how to make an accordion book and put it all together.